are listening to Cover Stories, a deep dive into the stories behind iconic album art with Adam and Charlie O. Hypnosis, a British design agency born in 1968 when its founders were inspired by the album art for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, cast a spell over the entire industry that started everyone judging records by their covers. Find any list of their top 20 or so covers, and you will never find this one on that list. Go To is an album cover that addresses the phenomenon of album covers, using brilliant English humor that exhibits dry wit, subtle irony, and a penchant for understatement and self-deprecation. It was the Olympian gods of album cover design, Storm Thorgerson and Aubrey Powell, better known as Hypnosis, what did it. Thorgerson wrote the essays contained within the album packaging, released October 6, 1978, and these will evermore have the last word in self-referential album design. When XTC was ready to record its second album, they sought Brian Eno, who declined the offer because he thought the band was good enough to produce themselves. Virgin Records disagreed, and XTC returned to Abbey Road Studio. The band wanted to continue the black and white color scheme they started on their first album, and they needed a title that fit that scheme. Enter the 2,500-year-old Chinese military strategy game, Go. It's a strategic game of territory, balance, and calculated moves that is played with black and white stones on a board marked off in a grid. The album's title comes from the game. Keyboardist Barry Andrews added the 2, and that sealed the deal on the title. Being a British band in need of some distinctive album art, the job was given to Hypnosis. The challenge before Powell and Thorgerson was to make XTC's album stand out in the black and white sea of music. Hypnosis has always been a fan of visual puns, and they proposed that instead of a typical album cover, they would craft an essay that would be printed in white print on a black background. Thorgerson put pen to paper and wrote an essay that filled the front and back of the album cover, as well as the record labels. The cover uses an interesting concept that went against the status quo of what other artists were doing at the time. The cover begins with a few no-duh facts before it veers off into clever sarcasm and satire. The cover does include the name of the album and the band, but they do not appear until the fourth line of the essay, in the same font as the rest of the essay. Here is what the cover says. This is a record cover. This writing is the design upon the record cover. The design is to help sell the record. We hope to draw your attention to it and encourage you to pick it up. When you have done that, maybe you'll be persuaded to listen to the music. In this case, XTC's Go To album. Then we want you to buy it. The idea being that the more of you that buy this record, the more money Virgin Records, the manager Ian Reed, and XTC themselves will make. To the aforementioned, this is known as pleasure. A good cover design is one that attracts more buyers and gives more pleasure. This writing is trying to pull you in, much like an eye-catching picture. It's designed to get you to read it. This is called luring the victim, and you are the victim. But if you have a free mind, you should stop reading now, because all we are attempting to do is to get you to read on. Yet this is a double bind, because if you indeed stop, you'll be doing what we tell you. And if you read on, you'll be doing what we've wanted all along. And the more you read on, the more you're falling for this simple device of telling you exactly how a good commercial design works. They're tricks. And this is the worst trick of all, since it's describing the trick whilst trying to trick you. And if you've read this far, then you're tricked. But you wouldn't have known that unless you read this far. At least we're telling you directly instead of seducing you with a beautiful or haunting visual that may never tell you. We're letting you know that you ought to buy this record because in essence it's a product, and products are to be consumed, and you are a consumer, and this is a good product. We could have written the band's name in special lettering so that it stood out, and you'd see it before you read any of this writing, and possibly have bought it anyway. What we are really suggesting is that you are foolish to buy or not buy an album merely as a consequence of the design on its cover. This is a con, because if you agree, then you'll probably like this writing, which is the cover design, and hence the album inside. But we've just warned you against that. The con is a con. A good cover design could be considered as one that gets you to buy the record, but that never actually happens to you because you know it's just a design for the cover. And this is the record cover. So it seems Hipgnosis has just self-confessed to selling snake oil all this time. Turn the album over and you get more text, but it is incomplete and requires the fold-out insert to complete. When you do complete it, the puzzle says, "This is the back of a record cover. Catalog number V2108. This writing is the design on the back of the cover. This design is not like that on the front. Its aim is to impart information about the record and the gatefold insert within, rather than trying to sell it by being impactful or clever or any of those things. We have kept it in the same style so that the entire package has a sense of identity, whichever way you see it. The record is by XTC. This is their second album. We won't attempt to describe their music because all you have to do is play it, and you can describe it for yourself. XTC is made up of Andy Partridge, Barry Andrews, Colin Moulding, and Terry Chambers. We have shown photos of them below because this is regarded as commercially sensible and helpful in creating their image. And if you're curious at all, you might find it interesting to see what the musicians actually look like. And there are more pictures and words on the very colorful insert, which you can only see if you buy the whole thing. Many people think it helpful and useful to know some details about the songs on the record, so here they are. And at this point, they provide a track listing. Following that, they say, you may also be interested to know that the record was produced and engineered by, and it now gives production credits. Lastly, we would like to make it clear that this is a product of Virgin Records Limited, partly because they wanted us to, and partly because it's a legal necessity. And a few other words attend this. And so, whether you like it or not, you've heard the screen on the album front and back. There was a trick to the back cover that required access to the fold-out insert. One side of the insert shows a color photo of the lead guitarist and vocalist Andy Partridge with the bassist and vocalist Colin Moulding. At the bottom left of this photo is the text that is missing from the rear cover. If you hold the insert at an angle against the missing text on the rear, you see the complete text. Ha ha, Hipgnosis. Very clever. Barry Andrews and Terry Chambers appear on the other color portrait. Now flip the insert over and you'll find Colin Moulding's street plan of Swindon on the left side of the foldout. This map highlights notable events in the life of Moulding, rather as a musical diary might. The first 15,000 owners of the album received a 12-inch Go Plus bonus with 5 extra tracks on it. Once again, Hipgnosis has produced a satirical essay that pokes fun at the industry, much as the cover of Wish You Were Here did. The album labels are similarly covered in satirical narrative text. The photos of the group were taken by Thorgerson and Powell, and Dave Eagle took the photos in the black and white montage on the insert. In non-English speaking countries, the essay cover was replaced by a cover that used the inner sleeve photo. Hypnosis said, "What we are really suggesting is that you are foolish to buy or not buy an album merely as a consequence of the design on its cover." Maybe so, but there have been albums I kept only because of the cover. Let's hit the pause button and chat a bit.
So when you said you've been researching ecstasy, I should have checked the spelling here, because I've also been researching ecstasy. So that might explain my 6-month podcast absence, so apologies there. But I was kind of delightfully romping through the void and just, trying to figure out this plane of existence we're on.
But you came back an ecstasy expert.
I did. What I meant to say was XTC, whose sophomore album Go To is getting our trademark dissection today. Now, did you have any prior knowledge of this band at all before diving in?
No.
Not even by name?
Not prior knowledge or prior interest.
Okay. All right, understood. Now, for me, aside from the inescapable earworm, that is their single Dear God, I don't know if you've ever heard that one.
No, I've only heard what's on this album.
Okay, you would absolutely know had you heard that song, because they were just one lodged in my brain as little more than a name. Now, their debut, for me, was kind of lost in the shuffle. This early new wave band scene that was very adjacent to punk, kind of sprang up out of punk. They had bands like Squeeze, Elvis Costello, The. Bigger bands from that scene, The Police, The Talking Heads. Those bands obviously blew up. But maybe a decent analog for where they were coming from at the time. Now, listener, you might be asking yourself, that aforementioned debut album, was that just called Go? Hence this Go To?
Yeah.
No. that first album was the oddly named White Music. But this is just another weird title in the pantheon of weird titles, I suppose, right?
Yeah. There's often a lot in the title.
There is a lot in the title.
Not this time.
No, there is not a lot in this title. And, let's go in on something before we even dissect the cover. Now, it said the band wanted to continue the black and white theme of their first album on their second. Now, that debut, while predominantly so, I don't consider that black and white.
No, it had color.
It had color. I think of a photograph that's been actually blanched of all color to be black and white. And again, this might be a small irrelevant detail, but their skin tone showed.
And in fairness, there wasn't vivid color. It wasn't a psychedelic album.
No. This is not a Braxis by Santana. But again, at least it showed, hey, this was a bunch of white guys making music. I'm not sure if that's what they meant by that title, but
I think so.
The definition black and white doesn't fit there. So the band also stated that this album's title comes from the ancient Chinese game Go. Now, this got me thinking about all kinds of things, which I won't bore you or the listener with here today, but does that mean that they consider their album a sequel to a military strategy game from centuries before? Or just because it was a black and white game?
I think strategy and XTC are two phrases that have never been combined in a sentence or a thought before.
Man, maybe later, but if you read any of the history of this album, it did not happen here. Now, let's get into that. We start with Brian Eno, sort of a big name for, I think, Ecstasy to
producers.
XTC to throw around. Is that going to be our new David Bowie?
Bowie, yeah.
But, tangents aside, they ask a really big name to produce the album. He just comes back with, "Oh, I'm a fan. You're good enough to self-produce." That sounds like a really... That's
a brush off.
Yeah. It's very much a brush off. It's a kind way to say, I'm too busy. Who are you anyway? Because I think Brian Eno was fully immersed in making, in my opinion, some of the most revolutionary sounds ever committed to tape up until that point. He's done some really incredible stuff. But thankfully, Virgin Records, they weren't feeling that whole self-production route either way. So they end up back at Abbey Road Studios, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about. Abbey Road is just never something I thought of as a studio. Obviously, it's a studio. And some smaller bands really got to take advantage of that place. Do you know if the Beatles had any sort of, I'd imagine maybe they heard the name XTC, or maybe they never even knew who was recording there. Do you know any sort of link
Well, XTC was 78. That would have
Yes.
been post-Beatles, but
Certainly post-Beatles.
But yeah, I think the Beatles put Abbey Road on everybody's radar, or every British band's radar.
That's what I imagine, right? So yeah, I never know if they
That's where we want to record.
Yes, yeah. I think that's what began people's obsession with Abbey Road Studios. So now you've got a working title and a studio session booked. So who better than Hypnosis to handle the artwork, right?
Of course.
Now, at this point in their career, the duo of Thurgerson and Powell, already bona fide Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they didn't need this band.
Yeah. So if for some odd reason you haven't yet heard the name Hypnosis, just go back through our previous episodes, listen to literally each and every one, rate and review the podcast 5 stars, and leave a glowing review. Or I suppose you could just Google it. I don't know. But you have Pink Floyd, Zeppelin, etc. Now, I'm endlessly fascinated as to why the pair, Hypnosis, wanted to craft an essay for the cover of this particular album. Not just in general, but why this one by XTC?
Well, if you recall, these two guys, Thorgerson and Powell, had spent a lot of time with beer and staying up late overnight pitching ideas. So I'm thinking somewhere well before 1978, somebody pitched an idea that what would be funny if we did a self-referential album cover, the kind of thing that says, this is an album cover, this is a design, the con is a con. And I think they pitched that one night when they were up late drinking, and when XTC came along, that Who Are These Guys paired up with this. You remember that idea we had years ago?
Yeah.
Let's use it here.
They'll be happy with whatever we give them because we're Hypnosis.
Right, yeah, that's how I kind of think. That's my theory. I couldn't find any factual basis for that. But I kind of think it was one of those ideas that they came up with long ago, laughed about, and then all of a sudden, they were busy, sort of in a way. I don't have a lot of time to give this. Well, let's do that. Strong, why don't you write this?
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, to me, it just kind of feels like writing a research paper just in case that topic ever gets assigned by your professor. Because you look at everything.
I can't answer the question you asked, but here is an answer I have ready.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wrote about something else. Hope that's okay. Because you look at everything they've done up until that point, and all of them just painstakingly poured over, considered,
and very visual.
Artful. Yeah, very visual, very colorful in a lot of cases, and just really leaned into design. So obviously, there's something artful to something like this as well.
Well, they did reverse the black and white. Instead of making
incredible.
print on white paper, they made white print on black paper.
That's right. It's funny. That's exactly what happens to my phone at about 5 p.m. We get the nighttime version of our daytime reading. Now, to me, it just seems like asking LeBron James to teach you how to play ping pong. You have an absolute classic expert who's, you know what? Don't do any of that. Just give me something else. Yeah. You get the world's best, and this is what they give you. So let's get into what they actually were given.
Yeah, okay.
And what we think about the cover itself, because it's simple, it's stark, and it fills the entire cover. But that it is just an essay.
Yeah, and I think it would be a whole lot better if you were stoned when you read it. But yeah, I kind of liked it at points.
Yeah,
but after a while, I thought, okay, I'm done with this idea.
Yeah. So the font is basically what? Would you consider that just like a white typewriter text?
Yeah, it looks pretty much like a Times New Roman, I guess.
Oh, all right. Getting fancy here.
Yeah.
All I know is wingdings and courier, so I don't think it's either of those. Now, as clever and meta as I think Hypnosis was going for, I kind of feel like it thinks a little too highly of itself. I don't know what you think about that, if that's too harsh.
No, I don't think it's too harsh. I think it's kind of, well, I think I'm stuck on my version of this where they thought it up, when they were drinking or stoned or something and thought it was really funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can think a little bit too highly of your own sense of humor at times.
Well, especially when you're high, you think this profundity
this is really far out.
Yes.
It's deep, it's meaningful, it's all of those kinds of things. But other people who are sober
Yeah.
might look at it a little bit differently.
Yeah,
So in
that's
that
true.
sense, it may think a little bit too much of itself.
That's fair. That's fair. If we were able to verify that this was nothing more than like a, hey, man.
I think after this podcast, we need to get stoned and read it again.
Hey, gladly. Yeah, we go all the way for this podcast. Now, it leans into a little too clever, a little too cute. Visually, I really like it because I've always been drawn to a somewhat austere, kind of punk-leaning aesthetic, black and white. But to me, again, it reads like a, see, guys, we, meaning Hypnosis and XTC, are all in on the con of selling and marketing things. But guess what? We're still selling and marketing things.
Yes. And they're very clear. You are the victim.
You are the victim. Now, I don't think they had our victimhood in mind when they were recording the album. That came just as a little bonus. But it feels a bit like a cop-out, I think, in my opinion. At least they were consistent throughout the entirety of the product and how it's displayed, as it were. The back cover gets even more meta.
Yeah,
you talk about that.
The record labels, we skipped that, but the record labels themselves have more of the screen on it.
Yeah. And you kind of have to, piece together the entirety of the message. There's a little bit of a puzzle element to it, which, okay, that's fine. But
even funnier if you're stoned.
Yes, all of this is funnier if you're stoned, or maybe it makes sense if you're stoned. But that back cover does get even more meta because it suggests to that potential record store customer that's browsing through the shelves, they'll only see photos of the band if you pull the trigger on buying the whole thing. So again, I try not to be so cynical about this, but the packaging and just the idea that this is art feels a little cynical to me. I don't know if you push back on that at all, but...
Well, no. And I don't get art. I really don't. I enjoy it. But, this idea of Hypnosis did it, therefore it is art.
Yeah.
Kind of sticks with me a little bit. But I must confess, if I had picked this album up or if I'd seen this album on the shelf, I would have picked it up and thought, what the hell is this?
Oh, 1,000,000%.
Did I want to know a little bit about what this is saying? What's this about? I don't know that I would have read the front and back, but I would have been interested.
Agreed. It would catch my eye.
So
absolutely.
If marketing is an art, this is art.
Yeah. So, mission accomplished in that respect.
Yeah.
But here's where things, for me at least, get a little cloudy. On pretty much every list I came across that ranked the band's Baker's Dozen studio albums, this is almost always near or squarely at the bottom of that list.
That restores my faith in humanity.
It is not well regarded, and by the band in particular, not well regarded. Now, the singer and guitarist Andy Partridge remembers the album kind of similarly to that. He said, it was assembled in about a month. The debut had caused enough buzz that they were scrambling around to force the follow-up out into the world, probably at the behest of the label just as much as the band. It just sounds like it was half-baked. Partridge says the band was constantly on tour. The lyrics were usually scrawled on stationery from a hotel room, a beer mat. What's a beer mat, by the way? Is that a coaster, you think?
Yeah, but it has the name of the beer company.
Oh, see, I need a beer guy to answer that. Or just napkins. I do know what napkins are. I researched that right before we started, so I know what those are. But tensions were high within the band ranks, too. And he's quoted as saying, something had to give, and here it is. So that's his wordy review of his own album. Now, to me, the whole thing just feels and sounds kind of strained. And oh my gosh, the keyboard. The mix of the keyboard on this album is so unnecessarily loud. It sounds like an orchestra of keyboards.
Yeah, in the style of the Dave Clark 5.
Oh man, yes, that's a reference you're going to have to fill me in on.
Okay, well, it was a loud keyboard.
Okay, yeah.
Back during the days of the British invasion.
Okay, all right, yeah, I think I'm familiar with a couple of those. But what's funny, that keyboard player, Barry Andrews, is the person that came up with the idea of putting the number 2 after the title Go.
Well, what a contribution.
The reason for that? No one knows. No one can remember. Just say, why don't we put 2? But guess what? That dude unceremoniously fired after this album flopped, which was an almost immediate occurrence. Now, after all is said and done, I just chalk a lot of this up to haste. I couldn't find any real information about what sort of leash the record label gave the band, but it seems like it could have been called Hasty Part 1 instead of Go Part 2. You know, do you think there's any chance that Hypnosis, you know, we tipped our hat to this earlier, but probably wasn't given a whole lot of time and was maybe mocking the machinations of the entire record industry? Like, oh, you want us to crank something out for you in 2 weeks? Sure, here it is. You know, kind of like, maybe I'm giving them too much credit. And like you said, they were just high, but who knows?
Well, you might be right. You might be right, but I think it was more like an opportunity. I really feel like this just seems like one of those things that you riff on more 3 or 4 times.
We talked about it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It just hangs around for a year or two, and then a nobody band comes up, and then you say, "Let's give it to them."
Yeah,
they don't have enough ass to push back on us, and they'll be happy to have it.
The happy part of the story is that XTC got far bigger later on. You know, they weathered this storm, whatever storm this was. But you know, I think it's pretty cool that it's a road bump in an otherwise successful career that apparently still goes to a certain extent. Now, there's an argument to be made, you know, that record companies at the time, well, and certainly you could say at any time, were far more interested in just flooding the market with product versus actually putting out good albums. Hypnosis's essay seems to comment on that, but they also just seemed way too invested in their own art to phone it in. So like you said, there's something very intentional about all of this. So
yeah.
That's what brings me back around to feeling a little less jaded about all of it. But because they always loved puns, in-jokes, social commentary. But again, it all seems somewhat secondary or even tertiary to the art itself, which they were so good at producing. I mean, they were on such an incredible run that has probably never been touched by anybody else.
But there are 4 thumbnail photographs on the rear.
They did
give us some of their photographs.
That's right. Yeah, they're there. But, you know, you mentioned this. This is something that will draw your eye, but are you going to hang Go To on your wall?
No, probably not.
There are these albums that, I'll play this to death. You're not seeing this on my wall. Or you'll put this on my wall. You're not going to hear me play it.
That's right.
Man, this is both. I don't want to play it, and I don't want to hang it. But, you know, I think about something like Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell, which the more I think about the episodes that we've done here, that's top 5 for me. What an awesome cover. I don't need to hear a single note of the music. But I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, I got a birthday gift idea now.
There you go, man. There you go. Just you can sell the vinyl for money without a sleeve. Just give me the cover. You listened to it. Did anything stick to you?
No. I was glad to be done with this.
Not a one.
Yeah.
There's not a single song.
Yeah, it kept coming up in some searches about interesting, iconic, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought, let's see. And there just wasn't a whole lot of there.
I think it's interesting this time in music and British music and post-punk and new wave. There's a lot of bands that didn't know who they were yet and wouldn't find out for the next 4 or 5 years. Because XTC,
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah,
really grew into something kind of cool.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't realize that until just a couple days ago when I was digging a little deeper. But if nothing else, friends, listen to Dear God, because you will never forget the harmony. It will be stuck in your head forever. But speaking of stuck in your head forever, we'll be back to do that again next week.
See ya.